And then when I was getting my master's, the CIA invited me to apply for a job. And I thought, I have no idea what someone like me could do at the CIA.
Welcome to the LMF Network Podcast. My name is Sonia Barlow, the host, CEO, and founder. This podcast is all about building our careers and confidence with a mission to build the careers and confidence of 25,000 people by 2025 through mentoring, masterclasses, and meaningful connections. For us, this podcast is about sharing stories, highlighting incredible figures, learning about their career journeys, how they overcome failure, rejection, and imposter syndrome, what we can do to build our confidence, be our biggest cheerleaders, and really define as well as achieve our version of success. Today on the show, I'm super excited to have Rupal, who is an author that I personally have been following for quite a few months now. So I thought selfishly, why not get her on the podcast so that you can hear from her story, but I also can ask those questions that I want to know about becoming an author, writing a book, being in the CIA, absolutely smashing it as a woman, and especially a woman of colour, and also how she overcomes rejection. So Rupal, welcome to the LMF podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Sonia.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly.
You got it.
I think it's really important to try and at least try to pronounce people's names correctly.
Yeah.
Do you often get people confused with your name?
All the time. And I always correct them. Before I was like, oh, well, it's okay. It's no big deal. It's a tricky name. It's not that hard. Just pay attention to how I'm saying it and then try it again for yourself.
I see these memes where people are like, if you can pronounce these French cheeses and these meats, you can pronounce my name. And I was like, I didn't even think of it like that, but absolutely.
I also just think it's sort of, it's a bit disrespectful to not try to pronounce anyone's name correctly because that's their name, right? So it shouldn't be something that you just have to deal with people getting it wrong. Like, just get it right. It's not that hard.
It's their first form of identity.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think is really important. And
exactly.
You know, I think it's super brave when people do correct I think it's super brave when people are able to correct others with their name. I personally wasn't able to at the beginning of my work kind of career. I was like, you know, they'll figure it out themselves, or it'll be completely fine, or they're not doing it intentionally. And I remember this one manager got it wrong for 6 weeks, and I was like, my name is Sonia. And then I started questioning myself, being like, is my name short for anything? Like, am I not telling her?
No.
Do I not know what my name is? And then I realized actually it's a you problem. It's not a me problem.
Exactly. It's not like people would go around like accepting others pronouncing their name like Jahan, you know, if your name is John and someone tried to pronounce the H, or you know what I mean? Like, it's, again, we just need to normalize that the norm is different to different people. And so, just get my name right.
I love that. So one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on the podcast, or visual podcast or show or whatever we now call this thing, is because I remember meeting you last year and you had a book and you were a woman of colour and you worked at the CIA, and I was like, all of these things are super cool that I want to find out how you've done any of those. And so I'd love for you to just share a quick overview as to who you are, how you got into what you were doing, and what core skills you used.
As you said, I'm Rupal Patel. I got my first sort of grown-up job at the CIA back when I was in my early 20s. And the way that happened was I was in graduate school. So I am a self-professed and very proud nerd and lifelong student, both formal education as well as just the school of life. And I was studying for a master's in international affairs. And at that time in my life, I had planned on joining the Foreign Service, so the equivalent of the UK Foreign Office, and being a diplomat and having the life of an expat overseas. And I had gotten a taste for it when I was in undergrad, and I spent a summer working at the US Embassy in Oman. And I was like, this is amazing. I love this. It was like working on issues that I think are really interesting and important, having a hand in US foreign policy, plus living in different countries, learning different languages. All of that seemed like the perfect career for me. And then when I was getting my master's, the CIA invited me to apply for a job. And I thought, I have no idea what someone like me could do at the CIA, in the sense that my impression of the agency was of probably what most people think it is, like full of just Jason Bournes and James Bond types. And I never realized that there was a whole career path for analysts, and that the analytical side of what they do at the CIA is just as important as the actual collection of secrets and running assets and agents, et cetera. So I interviewed with them and went through a very, very long and rigorous background investigation and clearance process that took about a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you waited a year.
I waited a year because...
And they kept you going for a year?
Yeah. And it was... So, I applied in the October of my degree and graduated in June and then got the yes from them the October later. So the real wait effectively was really just from June to October. So it wasn't that long, but it was, in the meantime, I was like, should I apply for other jobs? Should I wait for this one? And I was, sort of putting a lot of feelers out there in a lot of different capacities just so I could have some options. But yeah, thankfully, and again, this sort of ties into what we talked about earlier with rejection. Thankfully, none of those other opportunities came through, because had they come through and I had started a job at, I don't know, a bank or as a management consultant or whatever, I don't know if I would have quit that job to then start at the agency. So yeah, one of my many life philosophies, especially around rejection, is to always be glad for the things that don't work out. And that is just one example. So yeah, so that's how I got there.
Yeah, super brave. And so what skills did you use initially when you went to the CIA? Because like you've mentioned, CIA, when somebody thinks of it, including myself, you're like, oh, so martial arts, you have a gun and you're like rolling around at the top of the streets, because that's what it shows you in movies fundamentally. Yeah. But they came to you. Yeah. And they wanted you. So what do you think you were doing at that point to make yourself visible to them?
So one was what I was studying. International affairs, of course, it's incredibly relevant for the type of work that one does at the agency. The other is that I had a track record of living and working overseas, so I'm not, socially incompetent in different contexts, and can operate and know how to adapt to foreign cultures and learn languages, which was another key skill. So I think it was the combination of analytical experience and rigor, I guess, as well as just life experience and having a certain worldliness and not just thinking that the way we did things in America was the only way. And also, no one's ever said this to me, but I imagine that physically I look like I can blend in many different countries as a native, and I've been mistaken for being everything from Ethiopian to Puerto Rican to very strangely Polish. And I think Poles are amazing and gorgeous people, but I don't think I look like a typical Pole. Anyway, so I think the ability to blend in different contexts, both from a physical capacity, but also from like an intellectual capacity, was probably part of it.
I think it's so interesting. And that's why I wanted to have a discussion with you personally, because I was like, your career journey sounds cool, but also, I'm going to be really honest, no one wakes up and thinks, I'm going to join MI5 today, or I'm going to join CIA, or I'm going to be a part of like these agencies that are somewhat top-notch secret. I mean, I watch some TV shows and I'm like, do you think I could be a spy? And I'm like, people, if you're listening to me, I'm ready to be a spy. But then I'm like, what does it take to be a spy? And I'm not saying it's the same role by any means, but what I'm saying is there are certain job roles or certain identities that you think are unattainable, and or you don't, your mind doesn't even go there.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah. And I think my answer to that, for anyone who's ever felt that way, is you don't know until you try. And by the way, literally every single job, every skill set that you will need in a job, you learn on the job. So the main thing is to try to develop some of the skills that you think you will need, or do the research and figure out, well, what kinds of things are they looking for? Ask the questions of the people who work in those industries, what types of skills will get me in the door, but then also acknowledge and recognize and internalize that the skills you will need, they will train you in and you will develop on the job, because no one is born with the innate ability to speak, multiple foreign languages. I mean, well, some kids are, if they're multilingual, et cetera, but having the ability to go undercover or whatever it is, right? So get the information, develop the skills, and get the training or the degree or whatever it is that they are looking for. But then again, as far as sort of overcoming anxiety of like, oh, do I belong here? Will I be able to cut it? Blah, blah, blah. You will learn on the job. Every form of training, every valuable form of training and experience is lived experience, and that you can only get once you're in the door.
Okay, so as a brown woman, we have to reference your ethnicity to some extent. Yeah. How do you go home and you say, hey, I'm going to work for the CIA today? And then if you were like my family member, I'd be like, am I allowed to tell people that? Like, is that a secret? What are you going to be doing?
Yeah. So I basically went home and I said, I didn't go home. I called my parents and my siblings once I got the offer, and I told them that, look, this offer has come through and I'm going to accept it. But by the way, please don't broadcast it to the entire world because, there is an element of safety here, as well as I want to be able to control who knows what I'm doing because it is secret. So that was how that conversation went. And I think, all of my family members were totally on board. My dad in particular was very enamored with the idea of me working at the agency. And my entire time there, anytime I would go home for dinner, I mean, he just assumed that I had my hand in every foreign affairs, issue that was in the news of the day. And he's like, so tell me the real story behind what's happening here. Or did you do this thing that happened there? I was like, Dad, how much time do you think I have? Just me single-handedly running around the world.
But is it a 9-to-5 job?
No. So you can't take work home with you because, of course, everything is classified and secret. But the hours can, to some extent, be 9 to 5. But there were long stretches of time where I was working 4 a.m. to 1 a.m. or, 11 p.m. to, 7 a.m. the next day.
But you knew that when you were going in?
I didn't, actually.
Okay.
I didn't know what I didn't know, so I didn't even know the things to ask. So I was just so excited to be there and to almost go in with as few expectations and assumptions as possible, just so I could kind of just roll with it instead of building it up in my head that it's going to be this way and then being disappointed or expecting it was going to be this and then it's something else. So again, another sort of operating principle for me is to go on, just in life in general, is to have as low info a diet as possible. So know enough to not be a total idiot, but not so much that it sort of ruins the experience or just...
And it doesn't have your own biases. You don't have to you don't respond in real time. You really have to learn about it, understand it and move forward.
Exactly.
So how long were you at the CIA for?
Just over 6 years.
And did you change roles whilst you were there?
I did, yeah.
And how did you learn, and whilst you were at the CIA and changing roles, how did you learn how to negotiate? Did you negotiate your pay, your time, your effort? Like,
I was
where
really
were those
bad at
skills that you learned?
So,
most of us are.
Yeah.
Most of us are so bad at it. Like, at the LMF Network, we did some research in 2021 and 2022, and we found the 3 reasons as to why women especially feel that they can't enter or progress in the workspace is lack of community, lack of career knowledge or confidence, and lack of negotiation skills. Yeah. And you're sitting there being like, actually, this is what is required of you in the workspace.
Yeah, of course.
Or in life. But you're never taught it.
No. And it's funny because when I started at the agency, I was 24, I think. So I was relatively young. And it didn't even occur to me that I could negotiate. I was just so excited to have gotten an offer, and an offer that I thought was pretty competitive and, and well paid, that I didn't even think to go back and ask for more. And then maybe a year into my time there, I was talking to a friend of mine, and she was just mentioned in passing how she had negotiated for a higher salary. And I was like, what? You can do that? But so many of us have this idea in our heads that someone needs to give us permission to ask for things, or someone needs to tell you before you do it. And again, with the benefit of hindsight and experience now and age and maturity, et cetera, unless someone tells you no, just assume it's going to be a yes, right? Or the way one of my bosses at the agency put it was, better to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. So don't ask for permission. Can I ask for a raise, or can I put myself forward for this? Just do it. If you break some unspoken rule, well, if it's an unspoken rule, they can't blame you for it. And then you can, of course, apologize after the fact.
As long as you take evidence. And rightfully so, you can prove that you want that raise. I think
or you have a compelling reason to deserve it, right? So you can't just be like, oh, well, I breathe every day and I show up from 9 to 5 and, that should be enough. But you can quantify and qualify all of your contributions, how you've, improved the business, what you add to the business, I don't know, whatever it is you do in your career. And by all means, make a case for it. I mean, they might say no, but at least you've fought for yourself.
So after 6 years, what did you then end up doing once you left the CIA?
I went to business school.
Amazing.
Because I knew that in making that transition from the world of, that crazy world of intelligence, and then moving into the private sector, which is what I wanted to do, I wanted to bridge that knowledge gap. And again, as I said, most valuable knowledge is all experiential and job, sort of on the job based. But it was such a big shift and such a big pivot that for my own self, I wanted to be equipped with the baseline fundamental understanding of just the language of business, of accounting, of finance, of marketing, of all of these core business skills that at some point I would either have to demonstrate or at least have a passing awareness and facility of being able to speak about in an intelligent way. And so I thought it's a really nice way of giving myself that skill set, as well as then putting me in a position where I can make that career shift and say, well, look, yes, I know I worked at the CIA, which most people don't understand, and now transitioning into whatever role comes next, at least that I've got the analytical skills, I've got these skills, et cetera, plus the grounding of an MBA education. So that was why I went down that path.
I absolutely love that. And so obviously here, I really want to talk about your authorship.
Yeah.
So at what point did you decide that you wanted to become an author?
Always, from when I was a child.
You just knew it?
Yeah.
And so how did that process come along? My secondary question is, you have a book from CIA to CEO.
Yeah.
Did you have to get sign off from the CIA to talk about what you were talking about and to write it?
Yes. So I'll answer the second question first because it's pretty straightforward. Yes, I did. So I have a lifetime obligation to, anytime I talk about the agency or my time there, to get it cleared in advance. And so the book, after I finished the manuscript, I submitted it to our review board, and they gave me very, very minor changes. I think it was 5 small things that they just wanted me to change, which was totally reasonable. And then once I did the final manuscript, just a final sort of sign off from them. But yeah, it's really straightforward. It's they're very responsive, very quick and very good about sticking to the deadlines that I had asked them to stick to. So yeah, I have to, and it's not a problem. Of course, I want to make sure that everything is done properly. So I did, and I always will every time I reference my time at the agency. And then your first question about the process of writing the book. So I've always loved words. I've always written. I've always read a ton. And ever since I was a child, I'm talking sort of 5, 6, 7 years old, I've wanted to write, or I've wanted to publish a book. And I didn't know, it was just one of those things that I knew I wanted to do that felt like a life goal, or I knew was a life goal. But I never knew what I was going to be writing about. And because for most of my life, up until my early 20s, I've read fiction. I just assumed it would be fiction. So actually, when I left the agency while I was getting my MBA, that first year, no, the second year, from 2012 to 2013, I wrote a fiction book.
Oh, okay.
And it was a fictionalized autobiography of my time at the CIA, and the way I teed it up was Sex and the City meets Homeland. So it was a story of me and my 3 closest friends at the CIA, who are real people, and our lives and careers being there as women, working in war zones, doing the things that we did, and some of the personal and professional hurdles and trade-offs we had to make, and just bringing that, as you said, sort of making it accessible to a wider audience. So I wrote that book, and I loved every minute of it, and for me, it was like a nice homage to my friends, to the agency, to my time there, and it felt like a nice sort of tying up of loose ends. And then I shopped it around to agents. I had 2 agents who were really interested in representing me, who asked me to make a ton of changes. And while I was going through and making those revisions, the muse quite literally just left. Like, it was, and I didn't actually feel it leaving me. I don't think it was like anything that was ever in me, but I do believe in the idea of a muse and creative energy. And yeah, it just left me. And that book is still collecting digital dust on my computer. Just recently, after having published this one, I went back to reread it to see if maybe I could publish it now. And I think there is something there. I think I would like at some point to make those changes and dust it off and actually get it out into the world, but that wasn't the one. But I kept writing. And I, as I made my transition into starting my own business, mentoring and coaching other founders and leaders, I started just for my own purposes first, and then sharing it with other people, a weekly newsletter that evolved in many ways into this book. So the one thing, again, I will say to any or all aspiring authors or existing authors, sometimes the book that you publish or that you write isn't the one that you always imagine that you're going to. And you just got to stay in the game. You got to keep writing, keep doing it because you love it, without putting the pressure of like, this has to be the one that makes me famous or puts me on the Times bestseller or whatever it is, gets me the book deal.
And even those bestseller lists, like, let's just pause for a second. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of money, and there's a lot of like intricacies that we don't know about this.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Same with like, for me, I'm a big believer that if you're telling people that this is a paid sponsorship or like a paid advert, tell people how much money you've put behind these things.
So I'm so glad you raised that, because so many people just think that the world is meritocracy, right?
No.
That somehow the best work will somehow shine through and always get the accolades and get the press.
Honestly,
and that's not
some
how
of the
works.
work that gets it.
Oh my God, I know.
Some of the work that gets it maybe just isn't my cup of tea. But I'm like, how did this make that list?
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of the times they have great PR companies, they know somebody, there's lobbying
and they have a lot
efforts.
of money that they've put behind things.
Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's connections.
Absolutely.
Even things like, a great example that maybe has more or a lot of resonance here. Things like being on the King's New Year's honors and birthday lists. There are whole companies devoted to getting you on that list, to making your case, to pulling together the information.
Which I'm not into, but if you're not being honest about it. The same as like, so there are certain aspects of, let's talk about Forbes. Or even if we don't name brands, there are a few business publications which you can be a part of. But that involves nominating yourself, going through the process. If you don't have the connections, the money, the PR, or the time, it's not possible. There are other publications that reach out to me all the time. They're like, Sonia, we love you. We think you'll be a great leader. And they're like, we want you to be the cover. I'm like, oh, you want me to be on the cover? Yeah, let's talk. And they're like, but it's going to cost you £3,000. I'm like, what do you think I'm made of? And also, then I see people in my network be those front covers and being like, oh, we were chosen. I was like, you wasn't chosen. You literally paid for that spot. Tell people you paid for that spot. Otherwise you're lying.
Well, so I have not a different view, but I have a more, or not more, my view on this whole thing around press and PR is, if you did the work, then put yourself forward. So if you think you meet the criteria
100%.
And you tick all those boxes, for example, becoming an OBE or an MBE, pay the company to do the application for you. It's not like you don't deserve it and are getting there undeservedly.
No, I think you should self-nominate. I think you should self-promote. I think you should self-advocate, absolutely. But I also think that when you're putting it online, I think there's a responsibility to say the same way that if I got a gifted experience or I get a paid PR experience, I have to say paid or gifted or ad. I think it should be the same thing in like advertisement magazine to say, look, for me to get to X, I've actually had to either pay for this or get sponsorship, or this is the way that it's worked. It's not like you've woken up one day and magically you're on this cover. That doesn't exist. You've had to go through the process.
At the same time, I also am very conscious of setting different standards for women than we have for men, because let's face it, the men who have been getting these accolades and been putting themselves on these lists and all of these, getting the awards and the titles, etc., they're not out there preaching about how they paid for it. And so I'm not saying, well, take it however you like, but I think sometimes women try to take not too high a road. That's not what I mean, but it's a game.
Absolutely.
And so you get to decide how you want to play that game. So you personally, if you feel like, yep, I want to tell people 100% transparency, this is how I got there, and this is the steps I took to get there, cool, own it. If you don't, if you want to let people believe that, for example, something you paid for was just something that fell in your lap, that's on you. And you handle that messaging however you want to do it.
I think, and I love to disagree with people.
Yeah, good.
I don't fully agree with that, because I don't know. There are people who'll be watching this who are like, wow, okay, one day you magically woke up and made a podcast. No. In 2018, I was rejected from something. In 2019, I was 2. In 2020, I didn't think I was good enough. In 2021, yes, I had a big establishment come to me to run their radio show, but I had to interview for that too. Even being here, it's not like you haven't paid for the studio. It's not like you're not paying for the time. It's not like the effort, the script work and so forth. So I think my point being is, if you are in the spotlight and if you are putting yourself outward, I think you have a responsibility, a social responsibility to tell people how you got there. Even if it's just a asterisk and this is how I got there. Otherwise, people are going to believe now with social media that anyone can be anything and everything. But it's not equitable, is my point.
But
it's
also,
not equitable.
Again, I think we have to consider if everybody was playing by those same open, transparent
There's no rules to this game, though.
I know. And that's why...
How do you play it?
That's why it's exactly that. It's how you want to play it. And I think different people will make different choices. And as long, like I said, my fundamental belief on this is as long as you did the work and as long as you meet the criteria, then I actually don't care if you are telling me that you paid for the spot or you're trying, letting people believe that you sort of just were gifted it. That's on you. You make your own peace with that. However, I know how I will do things, and maybe sometimes it's different, maybe sometimes it's the same. But the reality is that, and again, especially when it comes to women, if too many women are taking the high road and being totally open about this, then people will assume, rightfully or wrongfully, that, well, women need to pay for it to get there.
Yeah.
So I guess my view is taking a broader social view, a broader sort of almost even global maybe view on things, and just making a call. You're never going to get it 100% right. You're never going to...
Absolutely. But it's like an example being in 2020 or 2021, I didn't get Forbes 30 under 30. Mm-hmm. I made that really transparent, open on LinkedIn. I was like, I didn't get it.
Yeah.
But I also nominated myself for it.
Yeah.
It's not like I didn't get it because they just didn't call me. I nominated myself. Yeah. I went through the next round. I was shortlisted.
Yeah.
A runner-up per se. And I was like, but you have to do the work to get there.
Of course you do. 100%.
And then on TikTok, recently I've seen it trending and people are like, we didn't know you had to nominate yourself. We thought you just wake up one day. And I was like, no.
That's the thing. Again, it's back to what we said. The world is not a meritocracy.
No.
No one is sitting at Forbes sifting through the internet all day long.
No one has that much time.
Who does, right? And similarly...
Either you pay or you nominate.
Yeah,
That's the rules of the game.
Yeah.
So kind of taking it back into your authorship, how did you decide that you were going to write a nonfiction?
Yeah.
And what was that process to possibly getting an agent and getting a book deal?
So I decided because I found myself, as I said, I started writing this newsletter, and it was initially it was aimed at entrepreneurs and founders, and then it became just my views on leading life. So yes, there are business elements to it, there's mindset elements to it, there are leadership elements to it, but it's also just having a thoughtful, my thoughts on what it means to live and lead and succeed in whatever way we as individuals want to. So it's very personal, but I also make it very relevant to other people. And I found that the kinds of work that I was doing in my writing was starting to really, really resonate with the work that I was doing with my executive training programs and the strategy work that I was doing with companies and that kind of thing. And so I thought, if I keep getting the same types of questions and the same types of themes that are coming up in both my writing and in my sort of practical work, why not make it more widely available to people who don't have access to me as an individual, who might not even know I exist?
Absolutely.
Because it's just most people, right? And so the idea came for the book, and the process was in many ways, for me, really easy after it was really hard. Mm-hmm. So the really hard part for me was taking everything I wanted to say and everything that I thought would bring value to other people and figuring out what to leave in and what to take out. After I had that sort of loose outline, or I guess the way it worked in my case was after I came up with the chapter headings and the structure, the writing process was an absolute breeze because I love to write. I already knew what I wanted to say. It was just now finally sitting down and getting it out on the computer. So that was really, really quick. And then also, and again, this is where we were talking earlier about making your own luck. I just started asking everybody I knew, like, hey, I've never written a nonfiction book. I've done the process before for fiction, but do you have any advice for, what to do with this nonfiction book? And through talking to people, through asking for advice, I was told about this, I don't know what to call it, like a club, a group, whatever. It's called Bite the Book. And they do this thing called Agents Tables. And it's where you go and you have to pay for a ticket. And basically you submit all of your material. So your outline, the first, 10,000 words or something like that, a bit about you and your background, et cetera, at basically submission materials that you would send to any agent. Mm-hmm. And then you send it in advance. You get matched with 2 agents at this event who then give you feedback about your work and either, in some instances, will ask to represent you. So that's exactly what happened. I went to this event.
Okay.
One of the people I was paired with, she loved it. She was like, I want to talk to you. We talked offline afterwards, and she was like, I would love to represent you. And I was like, cool, I would love for you to, I did my research and I asked questions and I, sort of looked into more about her and her other clients, et cetera. And that's how that worked out. So that part was relatively quick, but it was partly because I made my own luck by, as we said earlier, by doing the things, by keeping myself in the game, by going out there, asking for help, asking questions. And then we just started the process of submitting it to publishers. And in the end, we had 5 offers, and I took the one that turned into this.
And so you had 5 offers from how many pitches? Do you remember?
I don't know, actually, because we came up with quite a big list of both publishers here in the UK as well as in the US. So my agent pitched to both the US and the UK. I want to say, it was over 20. It could have easily been sort of 30 plus. I'm not exactly sure.
And how did you decide which one to go with?
It was, doing the research. So looking at the imprints at each publisher that publish books like this. So this book, it sort of sits across many different genres. It's part business book, but more smart thinking / lifestyle / personal development. And so it was looking for the right home and what other publishers and imprints at the publishers have published titles where this would sit comfortably next to. So it was making sure that we weren't just saying, hey, we'll take anybody, but it has to be the right fit for us as well as for them.
And once you go and get a book deal, what then happens?
Well, the skies don't open up and the sun doesn't always shine.
People are like, so now you've got a book deal. What happens? I know what happens for me, and I'll go through that in a second. But I want to know what happens for you.
Yeah, so it was amazing. I got my first offer came on my wedding anniversary. My husband and I were out to dinner, and I remember crying and being so excited. And the couple next to us were like, "What's happened? What's happened?" So it was nice to be able to share that excitement because, as I said, like the way my agent said it, she's like, "Rupal, this is just the first of many, but at the very least, this means that you are going to be a published author." And like just hearing someone say that, it really, it made all of the years of me wanting to do this just bubble to the surface. And I was so ecstatic and so very happy. So that was where the sunshine and rainbows came, right? But then it's just the process, and it's doing the writing, going through the editing process, then the copywriting, and then copy editing, and then book covers and all of this stuff. So there's just a lot of admin to some extent after that. And then it's hustling your ass off to tell people about the book. And
you have to be your biggest PR machine, which I didn't know.
Yes.
I want to make it really clear I didn't. Yeah. I genuinely thought that was going to be handled. Nope. And then mine came to like 6 weeks before publication.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, so why is there no PR? They were like, you're meant to do it. And I was like, I'm sorry, maybe I missed that email or memo, but clearly I didn't know.
I was really lucky in that back when I had written that fiction book, I had, again, asked everybody around me I know, like, do you know anyone who works in books or has written a book or has been an author, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I spoke to so many people, and this one woman in particular, I wish I could remember her name so I could say thank you, but she and I had a really long chat. She worked at one of the big publishers, and she's like, Rupal, the one thing that all authors sort of trip up over is you do have to be your own publicist. Because yes, your publisher may do something or they may not do anything, but regardless, no one is going to do more than you do. So you need to be prepared that for however much they promise, you're going to have to do a hell of a lot on your own. And this was almost 10 years before I actually had a book deal. But that was the one thing that really stayed with me. I love
that life lesson.
And it's true. And so, yeah, you have to be willing to hustle your ass off.
And how many times did you redraft this book?
To be honest, not many, actually. So I submitted my initial draft, had some really light edits from my editor, went back one more time, and then with the copy editor, she had some clarifying questions. So I would say, to be honest, maybe twice, and it was relatively minor.
I redrafted my book 7 times.
That's amazing. Well, that's
what you
wanted to do.
And how long did it take you to write your book?
So you might want to shoot me after I tell you this, but the first 4 chapters took me a good, I don't know, maybe month and a half, maybe 2 months.
Chapters in 2 months.
But then the rest of the book was 6 weeks.
And how long did you have to write it?
So I got the deal in August. They wanted the final manuscript by October. So yeah, I had about...
It's wild, isn't it? So when I went through my process, firstly, Firstly, yes, I've always wanted to write a book as well, right? That was like a dream, but I didn't think that dream was so close to where I was. So I remember someone introduced me, because I tend to share that I want my goals in front of everyone. So for anyone listening, what are your 2 goals right now, Sonia? 1 is to have my own talk show.
Cool.
So I was like, I'll just do it myself because no one's giving it to me right now. And 2, and I kid you not right now, is to say, please mind the gap on the London Underground. That is my goal. That is what I want to do just once. I say everybody, because eventually if I tell enough people, somebody would be like, we can make this happen. I was like, okay, cool. What if you're listening? But anyway, so I was at this event online during the pandemic, starting my hustle, starting my business 2020. I had no I had no fear. I had no shame. I was like, what's the worst that can happen? It's like, one day I'd love to write a book. And so a contact that was on that workshop at the end was like, we really like the way you delivered it, so I want to introduce you to somebody who is a commissioning editor.
Awesome.
And I was like, yeah, of course, I'll have a chat. I didn't think anything of it. But I think to your point, like, it happened so fast, the process. You actually had to give a proposal. So I spent like a whole week doing a proposal. I had my loved ones check over it. Went and got a book deal. I think I signed the dotted line around September, October. And they wanted a final draft in by March, April. And I was like, I've got 6 months. I didn't know you can negotiate. In most cases, you can't. But also, I felt like an absolute imposter for the first 2 months. So I wrote nothing. And naturally, I'm not a writer, I'm a speaker. So what I had to do was I had to literally go on walking meetings by myself. Like, I would put them in my calendar, and I'd take my phone like this, and I'd talk out loud my book into my phone, voice record it, transcribe it, and then just change the grammar afterwards. And then I redrafted it 7 times because it just wasn't there. And it wasn't punchy. But I'd sleep on it.
Of course.
And you'd think about it. And I think there's a couple of things I would do differently now, for sure. But let's go back to that moment where you finished your draft. How do you know it was finished?
I just knew. I don't know. It's one of those things I just knew. And then the other part of me was like, I know this is I've put my everything into it. Like, I knew I put everything into it. Like I said, I'd been thinking about a lot of these topics and issues and experiencing them and teaching them and helping others with them for years. So I sort of knew what I wanted to say. And then the other part of me was like, look, this is the apps. I know I've put my everything into it, that I cannot do anything more. Now I'm going to give it to the professionals to tell me if there is anything more that the book needs. Not that I could have done differently or better, but that the book as something that other people are going to use. And it was sort of like, let them help me.
Absolutely. You know? And I love the fact that you're constantly asking for help. And that's something I'm really kind of taking from this conversation. What are some myths that you want to debunk being an author?
Again, that all of a sudden your life changes. Because a lot of people think like, oh, wow, you know, I made it. I'm in bookstores now. And it's cool. I mean, it's amazing. The first time I saw my book in a Waterstones or at a W.H. Smith.
Which Waterstones was it?
It was the Waterstones in Piccadilly.
Yes.
Yeah. And then the really cool thing was I travel a lot, but the month or so after publication, I didn't travel internationally at all, but I kept getting pictures from friends who were traveling through Heathrow or Luton or whatever.
It's so much fun.
And they're like, your book is in Smith's. And I was like, yay! But it's not like anything changed. Literally, the only thing that changed was my book was out in the world, right? So I think sometimes we also build up these big life goals in our own minds, like it's going to revolutionize everything. And then all of a sudden, the skies are going to open up and people are going to be throwing themselves at me. And what's been really cool for me is like, that hasn't happened, right? Like my life is exactly the same on March 27th, the day after this came out, as it was the day before, right? But what is really gratifying as an author who wrote this book to reach and help as many people as I could is every day I'll get 1 or 2 people who will say like, oh, I just read this, total strangers, right? Will like send me a message on LinkedIn or through my website being like, oh, I just picked up your book and it's, you know, it's been life-changing, or like this one thing really, really resonated with me, or, you know, and it's just nice to know that it's out there. And that people, it's helping people in a genuine way. And so That is really nice. That is a bit different, I guess. But
it also doesn't change your bank balance.
No.
I think for anyone who's trying to write a book and get rich, that is not the way to do it. I remember people like, you know, friends, family, network, colleagues, people I meet on the street are like, oh my God, you've written a book. You have made it. You smashed it. You've written a book. Like, you must be so rich. Yeah. And I'm like, no. I'm like, it actually doesn't really... It can, but there's a process, you know. Royalties are anywhere between 5 to 15% of the book
It's nothing.
price. So I was like, well, if anything, on average, if I'm getting 10% for every book sold, they're like 10%, but you put almost the effort in. I was like, yes, because authors normally aren't doing it just for money. There's a wider, bigger dream, going to W.H. Smith's and having a book, going to Waterstones. For me, one of my dreams was making it on the reading list at university. I went to university, so I wanted it to be on a reading list. I wanted people to send it to me from like random places. So I've never been skiing, but someone like tagged me in an Instagram post where it's like on the slopes. And I was like, at least my book has been skiing before I have. And I was walking out of the airport and I saw it in W.H. Smith and I was like, oh my God, how is that my book?
I know. It's, the other thing that's been really, again, a pleasant surprise has been... my publisher's been working really hard to get foreign language deals. And and so it's being translated into Chinese.
Congrats.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a massive market.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I was like, well, I just need like, you know, a tiny fraction of the Chinese reading population to read this book. So so we've got 2 Chinese language deals and one of the Chinese versions coming out in February. So I am really excited about seeing like my book in Chinese. I don't know what any of these words will look like in Chinese characters. So it's worth doing, and it helps in all kinds of ways. You know, it depending on what you're doing it for. You can get on reading lists, or it can be translated. It can help people. You just never know. And I guess taking this into like a bigger life lesson is that really annoying, sort of slightly Zen or whatever philosophy you want to attribute it to, thing of like letting go of the results. Just do your, live out your dream, pursue your ambitions, whatever, but don't be overly obsessed with the outcome, because there's no way you can game how things are going to be received, how well it's going to do, how successful or not anything is that you try to do. So you just got to do it and then leave the rest to chance, to luck, to, I don't know, the universe, whatever.
So I personally actually need this advice. Yeah. I'm currently going through, I got the author bug. So I decided I wanted a second book. Yeah. I went and found an agent. I did the proposal. It's now out with publishers. I'm hoping that publishers are going to watch this and be like, yeah, we definitely want it. Yeah. But at the same time, I'm very mindful that they might not want it and I might not be ready. Yeah. And it might be a luck thing. It might be a timing thing. It may just be universe saying something. And I hope that doesn't happen, but you have to learn to live with the rejections and the failures and the pushbacks.
And also, look, at the end of the day, there's always a fallback, right? Like, not just for you, but for any author, myself included. Like, if in the event that future books don't get picked up by publishers, we always have the option to self-publish. So, it's not the end of the world if you don't get a book deal. You can put it out into the world if you want to put it out into the world.
Do you have an author bug? Are you working on another one?
I am. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. So I'm working on book 2
with the same agent, same publisher.
Amazing. Yeah. So that's all in the works, and I think at the very least I have 3 nonfiction books in me before I try to bring out and sort of put the fiction one that I already wrote out into the world. But I'm looking forward to it. I love to write, as I said, so it's
super cool. And so for those who are watching who want to get into publishing, want to get into authorship, want to take a chance on themselves, what would you say are your top 3 tips?
One, and this I'm stealing from Stephen King, but he's right, and maybe other people have said it as well, but to be a good writer, you need to be a good reader. So read as much as you can and write as much as you can. There is no substitute for just constantly practicing the craft. The second is to just do it for its own sake. So going back to what we just said about, maybe you get the book deal, maybe you become an overnight bestseller, or maybe you don't, or maybe you do something in between. P.S. The statistics for books are abysmal. So just know that if it doesn't turn into an overnight success, it's not you, it's just the way the numbers work. Something crazy like 80% of published books don't sell more than 10 copies. 10 copies, okay? This is not 10,000, 10. So if you've sold more than 10 copies, and that can be, you know, friends, family members,
Absolutely.
you're already in the top 20%, right?
I think I bought my first 10 copies.
Yeah, fine, exactly.
Just to go on Amazon. I was like, I'm just going to buy it so that Amazon numbers go up. And I've got no shame in saying that because you have to believe in your product and you have to do the work.
Yeah. And again, so, you know, again, just do it for the love. And if you get the accolades and you get the coverage and you get all of the things, then great. But you cannot do it just for those things. Too much is out of your control. And then the last thing is to be prepared for negative feedback. It's just a reality of life. Not everything you write, nothing anyone writes will be loved by everyone. Of course not, because by the very nature of writing something down, you are taking a stance, you are taking a position, you are writing what you believe, or if it's a creative work, you know, your view of the world or this fictional world. And there's no way and there's no reason everybody should love it. So be prepared for the negative feedback, for the criticism, for the haters, for all of that stuff. Hopefully it won't come, but the reality is it almost inevitably will. And that's okay. That's just a part of the process.
Well, Rupal, thank you so much. And so you've obviously spoken about your book so much. Where can people go out and actually grab your book?
Everywhere. So Waterstones,
everywhere.
Amazon.
No shade, just everywhere.
Literally everywhere. Yeah, I mean, all major retailers. Ideally through an independent bookstore if you can, just because we love indies, and bookshops are wonderful places that need supporting. So yeah, but all major retailers, and then if you know your indie bookshop if you can.
And how can people connect with you?
Very easily. So my website is rupalpatel.com, and say hello there.
Thank you so much for coming on, for telling us how to get into authorship, for telling us the skills that you need to land your first job, your second job, and work for the CIA. Also sharing some honest truths about marketing, PR, being your biggest PR individual, and just how to overcome rejection. So I know I took a lot away from it. I'm pretty sure we'll get you on for another episode just to talk about negative reviews and failure and rejection, because it sounds like that's a hot topic.
Yeah.
And for anyone listening, remember that you can listen back to all our episodes, www.lmfnetwork.com, and share, care, like, subscribe, and just tell your friends. And if you want to get involved, email me hello@lmfnetwork.com and follow our socials at LMF Network. You can learn more about the podcast, get involved and listen via our website, www.lmfnetwork.com. You can follow us across all socials at LMF Network. Remember to like, subscribe, share, and tell a friend. Get involved and drop us your comments or questions so that we can make sure that it's really adding value to your lives.